Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the ADI Part 1 podcast. Thanks for returning. I'm Craig Preedy
And I'm Josh Holleran.
and Josh, what are we going to be talking about today?
So today is another book club or book look, whatever we're going to call it. And it is the DES or Driving the Essential Skills. This one is a personal favorite of mine. I like to know the rules because I like to know the gray area. I like to know if there's a clear answer, and I like to know if there's maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. And I feel as an instructor, the driving the essential skills is one that I'll find myself going through just to keep myself up to speed with things. I don't reference it a huge amount with my students because the types of questions I get from them tend to be answered in the highway code. But for the more complex scenarios on the road or the more in-depth information that I need, it'll be the DES that I refer to and that I'll flick through occasionally to make sure that what I'm saying and what I'm doing is correct. And the DES, I think, is one of the most important books on maybe the first two bands of the part one test. For us as driving instructors, it gives us that in-depth knowledge. And a lot of questions that you get asked aren't necessarily in the highway code, but it does go into detail in the DES. But what are your thoughts? How can the DES help us prepare for our part one?
Well, there are so many chapters in the Driving Essential Skills book, aren't there, covering everything from road procedure through night driving, basic car maintenance, disabilities in driving. You name it, it's sort of in there, isn't it? It's very for a book that's not really as thick as it could be,
Hmm.
it's packed full of information, but in a very easy to read style, I think. It's got a great layout. Every chapter is very specific. It's supported with some good graphics as well. It's easy to dip in and out of, like you just said, you can refer back to it when you need to. And it's chock-a-block full of things that you won't necessarily get from the Highway Code. The Highway Code is a book full of rules. Know Your Traffic Signs is a book full of pictures of signs that you need to understand if you're going to drive on the roads. But driving is about having the essential skills. This is talking about how you control a vehicle. It's the knowledge you need to have for controlling a vehicle, keeping yourself safe on the road and keeping others safe on the road. Knowledge which is essential for part one, knowledge which is essential for part two, and knowledge which is essential for when you're passing that information onto your learners come part three and beyond. So yeah, I think it's a good choice for today's book club.
With the DES, and we're thinking about the part one, I often see on social media, like as we've discussed on previous episodes, you get questions coming up. And I think some of those questions on the part one surprise people. Like an example you gave earlier before we started filming was what is kickdown and how do we use that in an automatic car? And if you've never driven an automatic car and you want to be a driving instructor and you want to teach manual, you're almost gonna be sat there thinking, well, why are they asking me this? I don't need to know this. I drive a manual. I'm going to teach in a manual. But our students aren't necessarily going to drive a manual. They might want to learn in a manual car, but then they might go and drive in an automatic. And if I knew that one of my students was going straight to automatic, there'd be a few things that I'd give them a heads up with on kickdown. There's also information in there around trailers and the legal limits with them and the restrictions with them. Again, we could be questioned on this either on the part one or as a driving instructor. So that is a book that I feel like the highway code we read cover to cover. I think the DES we should be reading through as well. Now, you might not be able to read it cover to cover. It's not the most exciting story. But like you said, Craig, on how it's laid out and how well it's laid out, maybe pick a section, learn a section at a time and try and digest that. And start with sections that you think are going to be most relevant, either for your part one or for preparing for a part two or a part three potentially. But get through all of the sections because you're going to get so much information and so much knowledge. And then you're not going to have to turn to social media or ask your local driving instructor or your trainer. I've had this question on my mock test for my part one. What's the answer? You'll likely get the answer, but by going through the DES, you're going to find so much more information that will help prepare you for all three stages of the qualifying process.
100%. I can't disagree with anything that you've just said. It's essential reading. And as you said, it's not sometimes the easiest of reads. It can be a bit chunky. But something that I like to do sometimes is think to myself, and I tell my students this as well, is go away, read this bit of the highway code and become an expert on roundabouts. That's all you need to do. Just become an expert on roundabouts. Now, there's more information in the driving essential skills about roundabouts than what you'll find in the highway code. Highway code is about rules. The driving essential skills is about road craft, if you like. And yeah, I think if you can just say, right, today I'm going to be an expert on using my mirrors. Next week, I'm going to become an expert on junctions. So that knowledge just builds over time and it's transferable straight into that part one. You'll get a question. It's just going to seem so easy to you because you've done the prep. If you don't do the preparation, then these questions can sometimes be flummoxing. You'll get two answers that look so identical to one another and you won't know which one to choose. But if you've been reading the way that you should be and choosing your categories carefully, then these things will just be a breeze for you and you'll wonder what everybody else is moaning about. And you will become the expert that people will turn to and get your guidance and advice from. That's what it's all about, isn't it, really?
I think there's a good example that I've got that I think should hopefully give people the nudge to read and understand. And we discussed it, I think, on the previous episode. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. And that's about assuming something's a rule because that's what's always been done and what we've always been told. And an example that I've seen recently coming up was a question around who we should give way to at a roundabout, who has priority. And one of the answers was traffic from the right. Now, when we read the publications and we understand, there could be another answer that's the correct answer. And it's all in the wording. We always give way to the right on a roundabout. Now, that's not always the case because there could be signs telling us to do something different. But if we just go with, I know these rules, I don't need to read the book, we're potentially going to be throwing away marks that we didn't need to throw away. And that's just relevant to the part one. That's not going all the way to the part three. And when we covered the competencies earlier on giving accurate information. So it's all massively linked and it starts from reading, like we done on the last episode, the highway code and know your traffic signs. And then onto this episode, finding a way to add structure to your reading of driving the essential skills and absorbing that information. So you can get through your part one, so you can pass your part two first time, so you can pass your part three first time, but most importantly, we can put safe drivers on the road that have got all the information and not just pass down information that we think is accurate when it might not be 100% accurate.
You're right. Say something so many times and people will start to believe it and they'll forget what's true. I used an example earlier on. Do you remember I was doing something the other day and I said to you, where do we find the rule in the highway code that relates to the fact that street lamps mean that the speed limit is 30 miles an hour? And I searched and looked and Googled and I could not find that for love or money. But I really started to look through the highway code. I'm thinking it's got to be here somewhere. So it took me half an hour, but I found it. But it's surprising how much other information I refreshed my knowledge on along the way as well. So, these books are there to help us all. And yeah, driving the essential skills. Put it on your reading list. Needs to be there.
It most certainly does. And if you do want some guidance on your studying for your part one, if you've got any questions for me or Craig, you can head to our socials and we're available at the ADI Part 1 podcast, and that's either through our Facebook group or our Facebook page. And from there, you can also find information on the courses that we're running to help get people through the Part 1 and the support that we can offer later on through your process. So stay tuned for future episodes. We hope to see you in our groups and on our socials, and we'll catch you at the next one. Thank you.
Bye bye.